Good day, saints, pilgrims, friends, those who may have wandered into our little corner of the internet. This is One Pilgrim's Musings. I am just one pilgrim. Doesn't really matter who I am. Just one pilgrim traveling home to the Lord, walking on that narrow road and telling stories along the way about things I may have learned and things that might uplift your life and your day. Today, well, before I get started, actually, I always forget to do this. Would you please, if you enjoy my musings or my, not quite daily, but my pick-me-ups, which are short affirmations and biblical readings and poems. If you enjoy my presentations, would you please like, share, and subscribe to my channel? You see what that does? Now, I don't get paid for any of this, nor do I wish to be paid. My pay is that the Word of God reaches people. How can you help? Like, share, and subscribe. That's how you help. Because YouTube has an algorithm, and what happens is if people are searching for some Christian poetry, or they're searching for salvation, or something about Bible study, prophecy, or any of those kind of keywords, depending upon the number of people who like, share, and subscribe, your particular video gets a higher rating. And as we all know, when you do any research on Google, DuckDuckGo, or anywhere else, how often do you search beyond the first page? Not too often. Sometimes when you're doing deeper research. So if you would like, share, and subscribe, by subscribing, you then can, if you wish, get notifications whenever a new video comes out. But you don't have to do that. You can subscribe without doing that. But if you like, share, and subscribe, then my videos get moved up in the algorithm and more people will see them, and thus the Word of God continues, and positive affirmations continue to get spread. And you can claim, rightly so, that you are part of getting that word out, a part of making someone's day a little brighter. So, what are we going to do today? Well, it is the season of in the Jewish calendar. It is upcoming on the season of a holiday called Purim. Now, most of you that are saints and pilgrims, you have read the book of Ester. I'm going to give you a few fast facts about the book of Ester and about Purim that you may not know. And then I'm going to do a sort of a storytelling, a retelling, not directly from the book of Esther, but based on the book of Esther. A basic Purim retelling of the story. I got this from a website called Chabad, chbad.org, chabad.org. They do a lot of Jewish history and knowledge about the Hebrew history, Jewish history, and Jewish holidays. And in case you've forgotten, your Savior, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus, the Christ, Messiah, was a Jewish carpenter. So though we're not held to the Jewish law, Jewish history is our history. You are Abraham's seed if you're saved. So I'm not saying you have to celebrate the holiday, but it's nice to know something about it, isn't it? Okay. Well, let's give you a few interesting facts that I discovered about Purim that you may not know. Queen Esther's Hebrew name was actually Hadassah. Esther was her Persian name. According to Jewish history, Mordecai, Esther's, I think he was her cousin, not even her uncle, I think he was her cousin. Yes, he was her cousin, he was an older cousin. Mordecai was the first person in history to be called a Jew. Now, again, Esther was raised by him. He wasn't the first Jewish person, of course, but he is thought to be the first person to be referred to as a Jew rather than an Israelite or Hebrew. And it was, the way it was used, again, it was used as a derogatory term to him, and how they came up with it, I don't know, but Jewish history says that he was quite possibly the first Hebrew to be called a Jew. Now, King Ahasuerus, that we're going to hear about in the story, who eventually married Esther, he searched for 4 years for a queen, during which time he considered more than 1,400 contestants before choosing Esther. This was after he deposed Queen Vashti. We'll hear a little more about that in the story. Now, here we go. Vashti, Ahasuerus' first queen, some say, there's argument over this, that she was the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian emperor who destroyed the Jews' first holy temple. There's also argument now in this story. They say that Queen Vashti was executed, hanged. Rabbis disagree on this. Some say that she was simply banished. Others say that she was beheaded. Lost in ancient history in the retelling of stories. So, don't know factually, but we'll present it as the story is written for today's story. Now, this is a little interesting tidbit. Queen Esther may have been a vegetarian for at least a little while. Richard H. Schwartz, Ph.D., Professor Emeritus of the College of Staten Island, in his research reports, according to the Talmud, Queen Esther, the heroine of the Purim story, was a vegetarian while she lived in the palace of King Ahasuerus, in order to avoid violating the kosher dietary laws while keeping her Jewish identity a secret. Therefore, Purim is an ideal time, it's said, for Jews to shift towards vegetarian diets. What can I tell you? More meat for me. The word Purim means lot. That's lot as in drawing lots in a lottery. Short stick, short reed. Drawing lots in a lottery. In this case, it refers to the way that Haman chose the date for slaughtering all the Jews in Persia. He just picked a date, like picking a number in lottery. Excuse me. The earliest observances of Purim are believed to date back to the 5th century BC. So you can see this is why some of these facts are lost in antiquity. This was back 500 years before the birth of Christ. There weren't a lot of books and papyruses even. A lot of stories were simply told and passed down that way. Now, it is said that Mordecai was a very old man during the story of Purim. He was already a member of the Sanhedrin, the highest court of Torah law in Jerusalem, and they say he was 79 years old, even before the miracle of Purim. Now, the day before Purim is a day of fasting to commemorate Esther's fasting, which we'll hear about in the story. So if you have any Jewish friends, probably not a good idea to invite them to lunch around Purim. And another interesting fact, probably the most well-known one, maybe perhaps about the book of Esther, is that God's name, although God's all over the book, his name is not mentioned even once in the entire book of Esther. Just a little interesting tidbit. And now, on with a basic retelling of the story of Esther. It all began in ancient Persia in the 4th century BCE. The Holy Temple that had stood in Jerusalem had been destroyed more than 50 years earlier, and the Jews were subjects of the mighty Persian Empire that extended over 127 lands, most of the known world at that time. So 3 years after King Ahasuerus ascended the Persian throne, when he felt secure in his new position, he celebrated by throwing a grand 180-day-long party, half a year, for his subjects. And following this extravagant gala, Ahasuerus hosted a smaller, just a week-long party for the residents of the capital of Shushan, just a week. Now, in the palace's women's quarters, Ahasuerus' wife at that time, Queen Vashti, hosted her own party for the Shushanite womenfolk. Now, on the 7th day of this party, as Ahasuerus' heart was merry with wine, he commanded his wife Vashti to appear before all the partying men. He wanted to show them all of her exquisite beauty. Now, there's some argument in Jewish history about this, but it's generally thought that what he ordered was Vashti to appear in her crown and nothing else. Just saying. Now, Vashti balked at this request. No. Imagine that. And at the advice of his advisor, Nebushan, Ahasuerus ordered Vashti's removal and execution. Again, as I stated earlier, there are some who say she was simply banished, and some who say that she was indeed beheaded. Now, when King Ahasuerus' wrath dissipated, he was lonely for a wife. Now, his servants suggested that he orchestrate a beauty pageant. Officers would be appointed in all the king's lands, and all beautiful girls would be brought to Ahasuerus. And the girl who would find favor in the king's eyes would be the new queen. The leader of the Jews at that time was a Shushanite resident named Mordecai. He had a younger cousin, Esther, who was orphaned as a little girl, and Mordecai had raised her and treated her as his own daughter. Though she had no desire to be the queen, Esther was forcibly taken to the king's harem to participate in the contest. Mordecai tried to hide her, but it didn't work. So while all the other contestants beautified themselves with perfumes and lotions, Esther did basically nothing. But God had his own plans, as we will see. So when Esther appeared before the king, though she had done little with perfumes and painting painting and everything, the king immediately liked her. And Esther became the new queen of Persia. But as per Mordecai's directive, Esther refused to divulge her nationality, even to the king. Now, shortly after Esther became queen, Mordecai overheard two of the king's chamberlains discussing a plot to assassinate the king. Mordecai had them reported, and the traitors were hanged. So though they were in exile there under the Babylonians, Mordecai was loyal to the king and reported this assassination attempt. Meanwhile, Haman, one of Ahasuerus' key ministers, was promoted to the position of prime minister, essentially running the country. Haman was a virulent Jew hater. In fact, he was a descendant of the notoriously anti-Semitic nation of Amalek. Remember the Amalekites? Exactly. Immediately after his promotion, the king issued a decree ordering everyone to bow down whenever Haman appeared. Now, Haman would walk around with a large idol hanging from a chain around his neck, very proud of his position, of course. Now, when Mordecai, a proud Jew, refused to bow to Haman, Haman was infuriated. Give me my respect. Yeah, okay, whatever. He resolved to take revenge against all of the Jews and threw lots to determine the lucky day when he would implement his plan. Lucky for who? Now, the lot fell on the 13th day of the Hebrew month of Adar. Okay, remember that. Haman approached Ahasuerus, the king, and offered him 10,000 silver talents in exchange for permission to exterminate the Jews. Now remember, no one knew Esther's nationality. King Ahasuerus, who was no friend of the Jews either, told Haman, the money is yours to keep, and the nation is yours to do with as you please. So Haman immediately sent proclamations to all the king's lands. These declarations, sealed with the royal signet ring, ordered the people to rise up against the Jews and kill them all. Men, women, and children, on the following 13th of Adar, a year from then. Now Mordecai, he became aware of the decree, and he rent his garments and donned sackcloth, as we've seen oftentimes in the Bible under periods of distress. That's how they would. That's what they would do, culturally, and go to the Lord in sackcloth and ashes, crying out to God. Now, he also then sent a message to Ester, asking her to approach the king and to beg him to spare her people. Ester responded to Mordecai that according to the rules, anyone who entered the king's presence unsummoned would be put to death immediately, unless the king extended to that person his golden scepter. And I, said Ester, have not been summoned by the king for 30 days already. So Mordecai sent her another message. Do not think that you will escape the fate of all the Jews by being in the king's palace. For if you will remain silent at this time, relief and salvation will come to the Jews from another source, and you and the house of your father will be lost. And who knows if it is not for just such a time as this that you reached this royal position. So Esther agreed to approach the king. But she asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Shushan and let them all fast for 3 days and nights. And after this fast, Esther would put her life in her hands and approach the king. Mordecai complied with Esther's request. He gathered the Jews of Shushan, especially the children, 22,000 of them, it said, and they fasted, repented, and prayed. Now after 3 days of fasting, Esther donned royal garb and went and entered King Ahasuerus' chambers. Immediately the king did extend his scepter. What is it? King Ahasuerus asked. What is your request? I would like to invite the king and Haman to a small feast I have prepared, Esther responded. So the king and Haman joined Esther for a wine feast. And during this feast, the king again asked Esther whether she had anything to request. Yes, Esther responded. I would appreciate it if tomorrow again the king and Haman would join me for a feast. And then I will tell the king my request. Haman left the party a happy and proud man. Oh, the honor that he was being accorded. But standing at the king's gate was Mordecai, who still refused to bow to Haman, and Haman was enraged. When he arrived home, his wife and wise advisors counseled him to erect a gallows, and then to go to the king and request permission to hang Mordecai on the gallows. Haman excitedly went ahead, and he put up those gallows. He was going to get his revenge on little Mordecai, who, by the way, was short. That's why I said little. History tells us Mordecai was a short man, large in stature, in virtual stature, but was a short man in actuality. So, sleep eluded the king that night. So he asked his servants to read for him from the royal chronicles. They complied, of course, with the king's orders. They read from the chronicles about how Mordecai had saved the king's life when two of his chamberlains hatched a plot to kill him. Was he ever rewarded for this act? Ahasuerus asked. No, my king, he was not, the servants responded. At that very moment, you gotta love God's timing. At that very moment, Haman enters the king's courtyard. His purpose? Of course, we know. It was to ask the king's permission to hang Mordecai. But before Haman could utter a word, Ahasuerus excitedly addresses him, My Haman, in your estimation, what shall be done to a person whom the king wishes to honor? Well, Haman, who was certain that the king wished to honor him, responded, Well, my king, bring royal garment and a royal horse, and let one of the king's nobles dress the man, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, So is done for the man whom the king wishes to honor. Great idea, King Ahasuerus responded. Now go get the garments and the horse, and do so for Mordecai the Jew. Well, Haman had no choice but to comply. So on the next day he went and honored Mordecai as the king had ordered, and then immediately rushed to join the king and Esther for the second feast. So what is your request? The curious King Ahasuerus asked Esther at the feast. If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, Esther pleaded, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted me by my plea, and the life of my people by my request. For my people and I have been sold to be annihilated, killed, and destroyed. Esther then identified Haman as the evil person who wished to perpetrate this atrocity. Now the king loved Esther, so he was greatly angered. And then he was informed that Haman had built a gallows just outside for Mordecai to be hanged on. The king ordered that Haman immediately be hung on that very gallows. And so he was. So, on that day, Haman's estate was given to Esther, all of his holdings. And Mordecai was appointed prime minister of the whole kingdom in Haman's stead. But Esther, she was far from satisfied. Because, you see, Haman was dead, but his evil decree was still in effect. Because according to Persian law at that time, once a king issued a decree, it cannot be rescinded. But the king gave Mordecai and Esther permission, and they promptly wrote up another decree that countermanded Haman's edict. What they said was, in this decree, that the Jews had permission to defend themselves against their enemies. And by this time, considering that everyone now knew that the queen and the prime minister were both Jewish, no one would prevent the Jews from doing just that. The fear was now in the countryside. To attack a Jew would be to attack the king's family. And the Jews in Shushan were oh so happy. Celebrations abounded. On the 13th of Adar that year, the Jews throughout the Persian Empire mobilized and killed the enemies who had wanted to kill them and were preparing to do so until the turnaround. In Shushan, among the dead, were Haman's 10 sons. Now Esther asked the king's permission for the Jews in Shushan to have one more day to destroy their enemy, and the king acceded to their wish. It was on that day, the 14th of Adar, the Jews worldwide celebrated, and the Jews of Shushan killed more of their enemies, and that was the day that Haman's 10 sons were hung, just like Haman. So the Jews then of Shushan then rested and celebrated on the 15th of Adar. So, in commemoration, Mordecai and Esther established a holiday to commemorate these amazing events. Jews worldwide celebrate on the 14th of Adar, while residents of walled cities like Shushan celebrate on the 15th of Adar. This holiday, as you probably know, is called Purim, and it is the most joyous holiday of the Jewish calendar. This year, it will fall on March 16th and 17th of our year 2022. So there you have it, the story of Purim, and also a few facts about Purim that maybe you didn't know. I hope you enjoyed this retelling of the story of Purim, and I hope that if you have or know of any Jewish Hebrew friends, that you will celebrate with them the joy of this turnaround of events. And if I may be so bold, I believe that we're going to see a Haman and Mordecai type turnaround event soon to come, right here in these United States. What they're planning for us is coming for them, and the hand of God is going to be in it. For now, you have a blessed day. Shalom. Shalom. Go in God's peace. This is one Pilgrim. I'm out.